Hi students, this video is all about your SLR or the student-led research component. So now that you've done your scholarly research and you're working on your pitches, you need to start planning out your SLR or the student-led research. Remember, you have 4 options for your SLR, and by the way, I'm on page 151 in chapter 6. You have 4 options. They are the interview, survey, observation, or experiment. So in this video, I'm going to go over what each one means. So remember, you are trying to answer your driving question through your scholarly research, but sometimes you won't find all of the answers to your driving question through your scholarly research, so you'll be supplementing it with your own research. So this is research that you will do through either an interview of an expert, a survey that is a random sampling of people who are relevant to your data, observation, or an experiment. For the most part, interviews and surveys are the most popular options. If you want to do an observation or an experiment, you might want to talk to your mentor or talk to me, Ms. Park, because we will probably have to guide you a little bit more. Okay, so there's a few misconceptions about what interviews and surveys are. So I've been working with several groups this week and last, and I've noticed that there are some groups who have been interviewing each other, interviewing teachers, and interviewing their friends. That is not what the interview means. So if you already conducted an interview of like a teacher about a topic that was interesting to you or that's related to your driving question, or you did an interview of your friends, if you surveyed like 10 of your friends at, the museum or in class or whatever, that does not count. So nobody has done their student-led research yet, because before you even do the research, you have to get the methods approved. That means you get it approved through our pitch presentation, through talking about it with your mentor, and then definitely needs to be approved by me, because I need to make sure that you're doing it correctly. This is a huge part of research and academia. So when you go to college and you do surveys or interviews and observations and experiments that are not valid or that don't have validity, which means that it mirrors the actual people that you're trying to study, or it mirrors society in general. If it doesn't have external validity, the data that you find is not useful. So you want to make sure that you follow all of the expectations and guidelines. So please do not do your survey, do not do your interview, do not do your observation or experiment until you run it by me. So you must read these pages. It is super important that you read these pages, okay? So let's go over it. By the way, it says it right here. You must meet with your primary mentor before making any decisions to administer surveys, interview experts, etc. All right, so the first option is to interview an expert. Interviewing an expert is not interviewing your teacher. Your teachers are experts in teaching their content, but I know for a fact, because I looked at everyone's driving question, nobody has a driving question about teaching high school. All right, so if your driving question had to do with high school teachers, then yes, your teachers would be amazing people to interview. But your teachers are not sociologists, people who have expertise in like mental health or like eating disorders, or what are some other topics? People who have expertise in like sustainable architecture, people who have expertise in like social media and its impact on self-perception. Your teachers have written thesis papers and things like that for their master's classes on education, not on any of the topics that you guys are doing. So no one can interview a teacher for their interview, okay? You have to find somebody who is like a community leader, a professor, a professional in the field that you are researching. For example, the topic on eating disorders. It might be helpful to interview a counselor or a therapist who specializes in eating disorders among teenagers in Orange County. Or let's say that you're doing one on representation of African Americans and Latinx people in the media. You might have to interview a professor who studies the media, like a media studies professor from UC Irvine or somewhere. So we will help you find the people that you need to interview. So once again, it must be an expert. Because it's a person who's an expert, who's a professor, a community leader, or a professional, we're going to help you contact those people. So don't contact them yourself, because you guys are all not adults yet. You're younger than 18 years old. So it needs to be with a teacher. And if you do your interview like on the weekend, it needs to be with a family member who's like 18 or older who can accompany you. So like your uncle or your older cousin who's in college or something, they could accompany you to interview the person. You cannot go there alone, okay? So there's a lot of rules about what interviewing an expert means. The best people to ask about with like helping you find people to interview would be your teachers, because teachers have lots of friends in different professional fields and careers, and we can also help you look online. So in some cases, you may even have to email a few professors out there who have published works about something that's related to your topic, and we'll help you write up the email. In fact, we have an email template right here. Okay, so right here it says like to so and so, and these are called like cold emails. And so even when you email someone, once again, you have to CC your mentor and myself. So don't even send the email until it gets approved by both your mentor, and then show it to me, and then I'll be like, okay, yes, now you may send the email, because we do not want you to correspond with adults in the professional fields out there without your mentor or without me being part of that conversation. That is extremely important. It's an expectation, it's a rule you must follow. The second option is to make an observation. Not a lot of people choose this option because it's a little bit different than what you're maybe used to doing, but it's very interesting. So I had one group a while ago who wanted to study the gender roles of men and women in our local community. So what they did was they looked into different stores that are traditionally seen as like male dominated versus female dominated interests. So they would go to places like 4 different grocery stores in the local area, and then like hardware stores like Home Depot, and other places that are more like traditionally male dominated. And then they looked at the people who left the store and tallied the number of men and women. And based on those results, they kind of used those results to show like the percentage of men versus women in stores that sell like household goods and markets and things like that, versus like Home Depot and places that are more like male dominated. I thought that was really interesting. So that's an observation, and they did that over a course of several weekends, and they also had coded everything so that they know like, you know, what does it mean to be a female who left the store? Is it somebody who's like a 6-year-old girl who came with her dad? No, right? So they would really study and make sure that they knew how to code all of their observations. Another one was a study on narcissism. So they one group found 200 randomized tweets that they found online. So these are not tweets of their friends. It has to be randomized. So it's like you're randomly selecting 200 tweets that you didn't personally choose because you happen to know them, right? So this is kind of like how you do a sampling of society in general. And then of those 200 tweets, there was a key or like a coding thing where narcissism was where narcissism means that you think of yourself all the time. So they would code the tweets that were more like selfies or related to themselves. And then they looked at the percentage of that every day over a course of like a week. And then based on that, they made up a percentage of how many tweets from their 200 randomized tweets were generally more narcissistic versus not. All right, so this is a lot of information, I know. So it's the best way to do the SLR is just to have either me or your mentor teacher help you with it. It's just that's just the best way. Right now, because this is so new for most of you, it's going to be hard to do this on your own without any help. And that's why we call ourselves mentors. We're not here just to check your work at the end. We're here to guide your work throughout the entire process. All right? The third one is the most popular option, which is to administer a survey. So administering a survey means that you need to make sure that your survey is not too long. It's easy to access, so an online survey, a paper survey is fine. It's anonymous, and it includes well thought out questions that relate to your driving question. So if your questions have nothing to do with what you're actually researching, then it doesn't make sense to do a survey. Okay, let me give you an example. I noticed that there was a group who wanted to learn about makeup. And so if they had given a survey, they wanted to know how makeup made people who wear makeup feel. So like, does it help you feel better about yourself? Does it affect your self-perception? So in choosing who to administer the survey to, would it make more sense to give the survey to everybody at like Allah? Probably not, because a lot of people at Allah don't wear makeup, right? So you would probably want to give out this survey to women who do wear makeup or to men who wear makeup. anybody who wears makeup, because your whole survey is about makeup wearers. Okay, so you have to be very careful about who you survey. Also, let's say you want to survey something like about social media, just asking like 10 of your friends at ALA, it's not going to do it. It's not a random sampling. You would want to find maybe 10 from each high school and have like a sampling of 100 teenagers. Also, you don't want to just ask sophomores because you're a sophomore. You probably want to ask 13 through 19-year-olds because you're doing all teens, right? So you have to make sure that your sampling is a mirror of society or the group that you're looking at to study in your research paper. Here are some examples of questionnaire design tip sheets. So if you click on this link, oops, it should work. If you click on this link, it gives you different questionnaire tip sheets. So you can go to psr.iq.harvard.edu. Just copy this link right here, and it's also linked in your booklet right here, okay? So it gives you a lot of different tips, but there's different questions you can ask. You can ask a Likert scale, you can ask a yes or no question, you can ask free response questions, check boxes, multiple choice. So read through this. I'm not going to read every single word, but everybody, if you're doing a survey, you have to have 50 or more people take your survey. And honestly, that's not even going to be a true externally valid survey. So that doesn't mean it's like this, but this is the high school version of it. Okay, if you wanted to do a true externally valid survey, you would be surveying like a lot more people, and the way that you choose the people you survey has to be a lot more random. But because we're in high school and we have limited resources, we're limited to the people we know and other students at other schools. So we're going to have to be really careful and thoughtful about how we do this. So once again, do not just conduct a survey just on your own. Okay, you need to get teacher consent, and I need to also be part of that decision making so that I know how you're doing it. Because the worst thing would be if you did all this work and you did a survey with all these questions and you have all this information, and then we find out that the way that the survey was done is not right. So that basically is a lot of wasted time, right? Here's an example of a survey from a group of students today that I saw this morning during one of our sessions. So we have this one here. Let me show you the view-only version. So they're going to be looking into makeup's effects on self-perception within teenagers. So that's why, I'm sorry, within students. So that's why we have this age group demographic question. And like it says right here, it says your responses and identity will remain anonymous, right? And they actually got this survey from something that already existed. So that's a really good tip. There is a high chance that the survey questions that you want to ask people already exist out there. So I told the students, just look up the very survey that you want to conduct and look it up on Google. I'm sure somebody out there, some scientists already use that survey on other people. So using their questions and copying their questions is perfectly acceptable. You would just need to cite it by saying where you got it. So the source of the survey, they found a study that was published in STEM Education and Professional Studies by author Lauren Silverio, or researcher Lauren Silverio, in 2010. They found the survey, so we just basically transferred it onto a Google form. So here it says on an average day of going to school or work, how much makeup do you wear? So this is a survey for makeup wearers. So they wouldn't ask this survey. They wouldn't administer this survey to non-makeup wearers because their driving question only focuses on people who actually wear makeup. All right. So right here, when going out to a special event, how much makeup do you wear? And the second part asks them to do a Likert scale of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 1 being strongly disagree, 5 being strongly agree, to these 12 statements here. Okay, so they get their perceptions about makeup and how it makes them feel. The last part asks them an open-ended question, and then they click submit. It doesn't require them to sign in or anything because they made this anonymous, and anybody with a link can view it or can submit it. Okay, so that's an example of a really good survey. There's different ways you can do surveys. You can do paper surveys, you can do digital surveys, online surveys. Here are some really great resources. So everything in the book is in there for a purpose. It's not just there just to make more pages. It's for you guys to use as resources. So please read the survey, okay? Also, you can't just assume that two questions are related to each other, all right? And you can't also have bias in your question. So for example, a question that has bias is asking a question like, isn't global warming wrong? That doesn't make sense because then people are going to think that even if I know this doesn't make sense, but even if they thought global warming is not wrong, they will think that you want them to think that global warming is wrong based on the way you answer the question. If you ask questions, like two separate questions, and you're assuming a connection between the two, that doesn't make sense. For examples, asking a question if you eat junk food, like, do you eat junk food, yes or no? And the next question, do you exercise, yes or no? So if somebody said that they eat junk food, and then they also say that they don't exercise, you can't prove that the reason why they eat junk food is because like they just don't like exercising, they don't like being healthy. That might not be the reason. And you might even find responders who say that they eat junk food and they also exercise, right? So you can't just assume two things are related or causal. So make sure that you go over your survey with your mentor. Make sure you go over your survey with us. That's the best thing you could do, all right? So those are the 4. Here's an example of a survey. So make sure that you go over it with us. And here's an example of a survey right here. You can look at it. You can look at how people use survey data to analyze it for their papers. So this section of the book is probably the most important part to read. If I were you, I would just get a highlighter and just read this entire section, this whole chapter. I think it's only like 8 pages or so. And you only have to read the part that's relevant to you, okay? Because you're only choosing one of the 4 options. The last one is an experiment. This is a lot more complicated. In fact, I try to include everything about like independent variables and dependent variables and controlled experiments and everything. This part, if you're making an experiment, I highly recommend you talk to Mr. In, and then you also talk to me. If you really want to do an experiment, I will help you design the whole thing, but you need to meet with me. You can't just do it on your own because there's so many things that are important to consider when doing this, and it's hard to explain it all in a video. And this part is about analysis, about how you're going to eventually use all that stuff in your SLR into your, how you're going to integrate it into your research paper, all right? So for your pitch presentations, you do need to have your interview questions or your survey questions or your experiment or observation design. And if you did choose interview or survey, you need to link the questions so that the evaluators can see your questions and give you feedback on them. If you have any questions, talk to your mentor or talk to me, Ms. Park. Thank you, everyone.